Addis Abeba means new flower in Amharic, which is the official language in Ethiopia. Back in 1970, there were 800,000 people living in Addis Abeba, and it would become the birthplace to Julie Mehretu, one of the most significant and prestigious visual artists of our time. Guest to Palazzo Grassi with her largest monographic exhibition ever in Europe. Finally, we'll be able to admire works such as Vaniscere and Ghost Hymn, large, stunning, and original canvases. On the internet, you may find many postcards of Addis Ababa from back in the 70s. In some of these, you can see the architecture of Africa Hall, a monumental example of African modernism, built by the Emperor Haile Selassie. In others, you can seemingly still hear the traffic of Churchill Road, with its cabs, buses, and Volkswagen buggies. It's another typical city day in the Horn of Africa, just a few decades after independence. But so much will soon change in Ethiopia. First of all, the famine. Then, the military dictatorship. And finally, the murder of Selassie, the last emperor. This will take place in 1975, when Mehretu is just 5 years old. The emperor will be suffocated with a pillow. And Julie's life will also change just as suddenly. This is her story, from Ethiopia all the way to the USA, where Julie Mehretu makes a name for herself in the world of art as one of the most interesting voices of her generation. I'm Caitlin Prest, and this is Ensemble, a podcast for Palazzo Grassi, Pinot Collection, Venice. Julie Mehretu is born in 1970 and spends her early years in Addis Ababa with her father, mother, brother, sister, and a large cadre of grandparents, uncles, and cousins.
We had many of very special holiday dinners at my grandfather's house, where all of my aunts and uncles and cousins and everyone would get together at his house for Easter, Christmas, the New Year, the Ethiopian New Year. We shared certain dishes. So you all eat on one plate. And I really remember those and being given candy by our grandfather when we saw him. But he was a very kind of sophisticated man, always wore Italian suits that my aunt would bring him because she traveled to Italy every week. She worked on the airline. And he always wore these Italian fedoras and a three-piece suit and a bow tie, and very kind of, such a dandy in a way. And very, and so those memories are very, very dear to me because it was not just, it was the whole family.
At the time, Julie's father, Asefa Mehretu, is a teacher of economic geography at the University of Addis Ababa, while her mother, Dori, does volunteer work and teaches at the Montessori school. Asefa and Dori manage to save enough to buy a house of their own. But just 5 months later, in 1977, they find themselves forced to leave everything behind and to escape from Ethiopia.
We left in a very kind of difficult and challenging time in Ethiopia. It was it was during the years of after the revolution efforts were co-opted, and there was a military coup that assassinated Haile Selassie, and there was a lot of violence, and it wasn't a very easy time in Addis Ababa. And my parents didn't even necessarily want to leave, but when the U.S. was leaving, my mother could take the three of us and leave when the U.S. was basically kicked out. And they did the American airlift. We left with my mother took the three of us and left. My father couldn't leave then. He didn't have the visa. And so he came. Luckily, it only took 2 months long. I mean, some families were separated 20 years, 18 years, so we were very fortunate in that way. I remember the kind of long faces on every relative in my family. We were a very close family. So I remember my aunts and uncles and my grandparents. Everyone was it was a very kind of sad time. It was really a big fissure in our lives.
But what forces her family to escape like that? We asked this question to Francesca Sibàni, the editor of Africa for the weekly magazine Internazionale and curator of the volume Viva l'Indipendenza, dedicated to African decolonization.
Ethiopia in the early 1970s was still a feudal and underdeveloped country ruled by the Emperor Haile Selassie, who had been in power since 1930. At the time, the emperor's popularity and prestige were fading fast in the face of the extreme hardships experienced by the population. In 1973, an appalling famine struck the whole region in the north, killing approximately 100,000 people. At this point, the army took action, and the regime in power fell very quickly. The emperor was arrested and replaced by a military council called the Derg. The military embarked on a series of reforms inspired by Marxism-Leninism and forged close links with other communist countries such as the Soviet Union and Cuba. But after a few years, the military regime became paranoid, and as Colonel Mengistu Haile Mariam rose to power, he ordered the systematic elimination of all his opponents and opposition groups. Those are remembered as the horrible years of the Red Terror, which cost the lives of tens of thousands of opponents. Depending on the period, Haile Selassie had almost a divine-like image, as he was the descendant of the Solomonic dynasty and therefore of the legendary Queen of Sheba. Or, on the contrary, he was seen by some part of the Ethiopian population as an autocrat.
Let's go back to the 1970s. Mehretu's family escapes from the situation in Ethiopia and makes its way to the USA in 1977. Only the father stays behind. He has to wait a little longer. Meanwhile, on January 20th, 1977, the Democrat Jimmy Carter becomes the 39th president of the United States.
And our belief in an undiminished, ever-expanding American dream. Thank you very much.
Julie is just 7 years old. That same year sees the release of the Talking Heads' debut album, 77. The opening in Chicago Warehouse nightclub, where house music is born. And the movie Star Wars is released. The year 1977 is also remembered for the 24 hours of anarchy that fall upon the city of New York during a sudden citywide blackout. Today, Mehretu lives in Harlem, New York. But as a child, she grew up in a very different America, in Huntsville, Alabama, more than 900 miles south of New York, with her mother's family.
My grandparents' world was very, 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 for the most part, very white. It was a really big shift, and you know, my mother was there with the three of us, and I remember, you know, she was really scared for my father. This was the time of like the killing fields in Cambodia. That, you know, this was the time of like really devastating realities all over when you had these kind of early days of these military dictatorships, and a lot of the academics and intellectuals were getting just flat out murdered. And so I think that was a really harrowing and nerve-wracking time for my mother. We really missed our father. And
later on, the Mehretu family will move up north to Michigan. Here in the East Lansing college town, Julie's father will start lecturing again. So Julie finds herself growing up in America in the 80s, which means being labeled a member of the MTV generation, from the music television channel that started in 1981.
Turn it on, leave it on. I want my MTV!
MTV is a kaleidoscope of sounds and colors that will come to form the style of the time. Still, the future artist Mehretu stays close to her Ethiopian roots and its rich musical and artistic tradition.
Early 80s was like, Prince, Michael Jackson, Motown, a lot of African music, a lot of high life, a lot of Afrobeat, because that's the community that I was in, a lot of Ethiopian music, a lot of Ethiopian jazz, a lot of different kinds of Ethiopian music, really. But you had this kind of like really fun like punk scene happening in Detroit, like early punk that was kind of reverberating through in the 80s. We were like the generation that grew up with MTV. Like that was kind of a new phenomenon. And so I grew up with all of that moment.
The MTV generation grows up soon enough, and it finds itself face to face with a terrible social, political, and cultural tragedy: the AIDS epidemic. At the time, this illness of the immune system is labeled the gay plague. These are the years of Ronald Reagan, which will last from 1981 to 1989. He ignores the problem for much too long, finally choosing to address it in 1985, 4 years after the first cases, and only after 3,500 victims had been claimed.
Yeah, I feel like HIV/AIDS was something that was really kind of traumatic. That was kind of one of the big kind of social realities that we were paying attention to. That, and then of course abortion rights. One of the biggest other dynamics that really affected us and was Reagan and the Reagan years, and kind of this diminishing of social. A lot of the work that was done by the civil rights movement, and you're seeing the reversal of that. And so, that started when I was even in middle school.
It's here, at school, that Julie starts to fall in love with art.
I always liked to make art. It was the place that I found solace in school. I had a lot of energy. I wasn't the kid who wanted to always who was like, I wasn't as engaged in certain classes. I found maybe I was more distracted in certain classes, especially. So but going to the art class was something I could do, and I was really excited about it. And I didn't grow up in a place where contemporary art was even something we knew about. I grew up going to major museums, but contemporary art wasn't something that they had a lot of, and you didn't have the kind of numerous numbers of contemporary art institutions that you have now.
Mehretu graduates from the East Lansing High School, and in 1992, she receives a Bachelor of Arts from Kalamazoo College after spending her last year of studies abroad at the University of Dakar in Senegal. She'll start painting in the 90s, and one of her first works is called Timeline Analysis of Character Behavior, Migration Direction Map. It's a sort of map of migratory movements, and this will characterize a great part of her work in the future. Mehretu's paintings will often be inspired by sciences, such as cartography, demographics, and statistics. Later on, she'll also develop a tight relationship with technical drawing and architecture, a figurative chaos touched on by a thin, melodic vibration. Her work gains traction in the 2000s. 2003 is the year of her first major solo exhibition at the Walker Art Center in Minneapolis, Minnesota. In 2005, she'll take part in Africa Remix, a traveling exhibition of artists both from Africa and from the African diaspora. In this case, the exhibition is held at the Centre Pompidou of Paris. In 2007, she starts working on a great mural, as large as a tennis court, inside the main building of Goldman Sachs Bank in Manhattan. The entire piece is put together with the help of around 30 assistants, and it can be seen from the street. It's a, quote, exploration of the space-time of globalization, unquote. Indeed, Mehretu's style, due to its complexity and stratification, is perfect to represent in painting the sense of financial capitalism. Only Mehretu and a few others would have been able to display the abstract, evasive, and unstable nature of the new online markets. Most of the paintings use an acrylic mixture that, once dried, leaves a transparent base, which can be layered again. From 2010 to today, Mehretu hasn't shied away from recent history either. So the palaces of Saddam Hussein and the Syrian civil war would respectively inspire her works, Chimera and Epigraph, Damascus. In many of Mehretu's works, news pictures are modified either digitally or by means of printing and cutting. She prefers layered painting and partially erases what's beneath, using serigraphy, ink, and acrylic. In a way, it's as if she's processing, transforming, dulling or breaking images of places or history until they disappear entirely. On one side, the eye of Mehretu almost seems to work like a sort of algorithm, processing data and images. On the other, the gaze stays warm, emotional, and human. One part calculation and precision, the other haziness and atmosphere. Let's skip back to 2004. Mehretu and two of her friends found a 200-acre artist retreat in the county of Sullivan, New York. This place still exists today, and it's called Denniston Hill. Denniston Hill is another product of Mehretu's artistic talent, which doesn't just express itself with brushes and paints, but indeed through the creation of a common space for an ensemble. Such is the title of the exhibition at Palazzo Grassi. Paul Pfeiffer is an American artist from Hawaii. His Incarnator is one of the works present here with ensemble. Pfeiffer is also himself one of the founders of Denniston Hill.
I met Julie in around 1999 or 2000 when we were both working with a gallery called The Project, which was in Harlem. The different aspects of how we met each other and worked together has to do with an idea from the beginning that there's a kind of community of creativity and intellectual exchange, which I think all young artists really depend on to create a kind of ecosystem that can support the hard work and also the intense demands of competing in the art world in New York City. So this space upstate called Denniston Hill was really meant to be a kind of refuge where we could be outside of the city and in a way outside of the competitive environment of the art world to be in a kind of intellectual and creative community together.
Denniston Hill is a quiet and peaceful place. Very few houses and many trees. Paul Pfeiffer remembers those early days very well, as everything came together.
I would also say that specific kind of memory that I have of those early days, which continues to this day, is the group dinners. On a daily basis, we would cook for each other, are a kind of gathering of the community. You know, I'm working on my projects and Julie is working on her projects in different parts of the land. But we come together at meals as a group and sit down together, cook together, enjoy conversation over meals together. The work of artists is by nature always considered to be the work of individuals, like, this idea of individual geniuses. It's a very old idea and a very lasting idea. So it doesn't assume that we're all the same, but to really think outside the box from this kind of normative way of being in the world is very important. I think Denniston Hill's mission to create a space where people can come together to work on the collective project, explore our connections and also our differences.
Julie Mehretu isn't new to this sort of project. In 2017, she takes part in another initiative with a tight group of friends and artists. They are Adam Pendleton, Rashid Johnson, and Ellen Gallagher. In this case, the goal isn't so much to create a community as it is to save something that is in serious danger. The old, rustic, country birthplace, of Nina Simone, singer and activist, music legend, and civil rights icon. The house is in Tryon, North Carolina, and in 2017, it is at serious risk of being demolished. Today, thanks to Julie, Nina Simone's house is being restructured and maintained by means of a fund for the protection of African American culture.
Nina Simone is an important artist to all of us, especially as a liberatory maker and an artist who really was moved by abstraction and new music and classical music, but was denied the opportunity to perform that kind of music. I think that was really important to me. I mean, one of the reasons she's always been so important to me, but that was one of the reasons that it became this project that I think was really moving to be a part of.
In the next episode, we'll delve into the experience of Ensemble, the largest exhibition of Julie Mehretu in Europe at Palazzo Grassi in Venice. We'll hear her voice again, and those of Caroline Bourgeois, curator to the exhibition, artist Paul Pfeiffer, and pianist and composer Jason Moran. And we'll finally take a closer look at Julie Mehretu's great canvases. Ensemble is a series by Cora Media for Palazzo Grassi, Pinot Collection, Venezia. It was written by Ivan Carozzi and narrated by me, Caitlin Prest. Fact-checking by Francesca Sibàni. Story editing by Sarah Palma. It was adapted into English by John Vincent. Music and sound supervision by Luca Micheli. Post-production and editing by Cosma Castellucci. The project manager is Monia Donati. The producers are Martina Conte and Alex Peverengo. Production coordinator is Matteo Scelsa. Recordings by Lucrezia Marcelli and Luca Posi. On-field recording by Giacomo Zilio.